She came in, lovely woman. She's got a couple kids. She's doing the things. And in about the first 15 minutes of our time together, she said, it's just so hard. It's like about 50 times. And I finally stopped her. I said, do you know that you've said it's so hard
Mm-hmm.
about 50 times?
Mm.
I'm starting to think, well, gosh, I don't know why you would think it was anything else except really hard because you continuously tell yourself that all day long.
You were twisted. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Soberful podcast. I want to introduce my guest today, Shelby John. Welcome, Shelby.
Thank you so much, Veronica. It's lovely to be.
It's nice to have you. Our topic today is we're going to be talking about negative thinking patterns, which I know nobody listening suffers from any negative thinking. It's definitely conquering our thoughts and having mastery over our inner life, which is about our thoughts, is a real skill of sobriety. So I'm really excited to talk about that with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. First of all, you're a licensed clinical social worker?
Sure, I have, yes. So I got sober in 2002. I was actually I graduated from grad school as a social worker in May of 2002, which is always funny to me when I think about that. And then I worked for a while in the field in child welfare. Then I stayed home. I had 3 kids in 4 years. So I was a little busy with doing the mom thing. So I was home for a while. And then I was able to start building a private practice when my son went to kindergarten. So I started really slow, just kind of building my private practice. And then that's grown over time. I got trained in EMDR therapy, which is a neurologically based form of trauma treatment. And I specialize in addictions and anxiety. And then I built a coaching program probably about 6 years ago or so now to really step outside of the therapy practice and be able to expand into all of the states and around the world, right? Because we're bound by the walls of our states that we're licensed in. So that helped me. And I created a podcast as well, like yours, called Confident Sober Women. I wrote a memoir. So
Let me ask you, how's that going, having like young adults? Tell me your secrets.
I think it's really good for us right now. Like right now, our teenage years were pretty difficult. If you know anything about me or you've seen my stuff online or listened to my podcast, you've probably heard me talk about some of that pretty candidly. And certainly in the book, it's completely shared all of it. It was a very difficult time for us for just a variety of reasons. I'm so thankful that I was sober for kind of a long time when that stage hit me. And then I had a lot of emotional sobriety tools specifically around like even the negative thinking patterns, because when we're parenting, I don't know about you, but things get triggered, for lack of a better word. Like I experienced a lot of that, turning things on myself. What could I have done differently? What are we doing wrong? Why are they like this? And so what I learned through that was so great. I mean, they taught me a lot, even in all of that pain, that really their choices are not mine.
We will get onto the topic in a second of negative thinking patterns because it's all related. But I was just talking to a colleague before this call about mothers and, the amount of work that you do in therapy on your relationship with your mother, right? Like I've spent hundreds of hours in therapy talking about my mother. And as a therapist, everything seems to go back to the mother. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm a mother. It's like such a, it's such a pivotal position in somebody's life. And nobody gets it right or perfect. We just do, if we're lucky, we do good enough. If we're lucky, right? And I was 10 years sober when I had my kids. I was going to be perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very humbling experience, because and I was never somebody who thought like, oh, not my child, or this will never happen. I just wasn't that mom. I knew too much. By the time I had kids, that I just knew kids make stupid choices, and also they say mean things and stuff. So it is a very humbling experience, and like I mentioned, and it is subject to our topic. It's so easy to go down that spiral of like, what did I do wrong, or this is my fault, and I did that for a while. And my husband actually, I think, really struggled with that, maybe for a little longer than I did. It's really hard for him. The only thing, and I don't know, maybe more will be revealed when they're even more adult. And my second one, we had some challenges with too. She's very, very different and has other challenges herself personally that we had to manage and navigate, which were also very painful, but it didn't look the same. And the third one, he's different. I don't know. Jury's out on him still. But by the time she was a senior of high school, I guess some of it's maturity, and some of it is just the work we continue to do and just continuing to lift her up, continuing to try to push her forward. she's came around and like changed a lot and started to say things like, I love you. It was astounding. I mean,
Mm.
I remember being like, what? Like, like, okay, this is great. And then she left for college. And I always say that's God's like biggest joke ever. Like, you made her good and then she left. Thanks a lot. Um, but it's not like that today. I don't know how it will be next year or two years from
Mm.
now or when she becomes a mother. And you're right, it's a humbling experience. Things do come down to us, but also yes and no. Like when I was in the throes of that, I remember one time she said she's sitting on her bed, and she was so angry and she was so mean and she was just awful. And she was like, I'm gonna leave and never come back and you'll never see your grandkids or me. And I was like, I said, that will be really awful. And she's like, and it'll be your fault. And I said, no, no, it won't be my fault. I said, it won't. I said, that'll be your choice. And that is a choice that you'll be able to make, but it won't be my fault. And I walked out of a room. It was a very profound moment for me just because it
Wow.
was a moment when I realized like, this is not about me.
Yeah.
And I would scan myself. What did I say today? What did I do today? What did I, to see where there was my part, because I was always ready to be like, I'm sorry if I hurt you in that way, or I'm sorry I said that thing, or what, but I just never really could come up with anything. She
Mm.
was just troubled in her own way for
Mm.
whatever reason,
Mm. Mm.
Um, but those negative thoughts started to shift when I really took myself out of that situation,
Mm.
left what didn't belong to me over to the side, and focused on what I could do in any given moment. And that,
Mm.
to me, that's the profound change in parenting. It doesn't make it less painful, but it just does have a sense of freedom and a little bit more peace around it
Mm.
than when we're stuck in all that kind of that mess.
I think people have got a lot out of that. It letting go. The hardest thing is letting go, being in recovery, letting go of outcomes, right? Keeping to your side of the street, which are all great things. But then when it comes to your kids, like
Worse.
that's a whole other
It's the
layer
worst.
of like, yeah, letting go of their outcomes and trusting. Oh, yes, there's so much there. And let me ask you, during this difficult time, how did you manage your own negative thinking? Because it's really easy to get triggered, even with
Mhm.
the length of sobriety and experience that we have, and then spiral, right? Like, that spiral starts. It's like dominoes going
Yes.
down. How do
Mhm.
you deal with that?
So I really learned, this is kind of what I teach my clients, is sort of a couple of step process
Mm-hmm.
where I really learned how to kind of take an inventory of what my negative thoughts were so that I was really aware of it. And I think for most of us, we have patterns, right? For me, it's always, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, or I'm a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have a couple that always come up all the time. And so then I learned to take an inventory of those thoughts, like, and especially like when they were happening. Is it happening like right after an interaction with my husband, or when my child looks at me a certain way, or when my boss calls me and says, I want to have a meeting, like, or is it after, when is it happening? And then also linking that up with what kind of feelings come up for you. Where do you feel it in your body? So we're talking really about getting extremely intentional about what the thoughts are, and then how they show up for you, both
Mm-hmm.
physically and emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
so that you get to know your own pattern. Once you have that, then you're like, oh, okay. So every time I have any kind of this look from my husband, or I know that there's an interaction, we're going to talk about, for example, let's say money. Like we have to talk about money, and you're like, ooh, okay. Every time that topic comes up, or he says to me, hey, we need to talk on Sunday, and you're like, oh, I know what this means. I'm not doing enough. I'm not saving enough. I'm not, then you can start to insert kind of like other things, right? You can once you know what they are, how it's feeling, how it's showing up in your body, then you can use that for anything. So when you get those emotions and that feeling in your body another time, you can quickly be like, oh, this is familiar to me. Like, what is going on with me right now? What is the thought pattern I'm having right now? So then you've identified it, you know when it's happening. So now we just need to figure out what we could do instead. And I always tell my clients, it's really just like a gentle shift away from that negative pattern. So it's not like this glaring, I'm the best mom in the world, or I'm always doing blah, blah, blah. It's more like, even though I made that mistake today, I did about 100 things really well. Or even though I spent a little bit too much money this month. I know how to correct that next month.
Hmm.
Or even though I yelled at my child, I was able to go back and correct that with her. So we're making these gentle shifts away from that negative thinking and into something that's much more positive or peaceful, kind of just a little more neutral, even. It doesn't even have to be happy all the time. It just needs to get away from that negative. So then that becomes, once you start doing that regularly, it just becomes part of your practice.
We can all be a bit kinder to
Yeah,
ourselves,
I
right? A
know.
lot of that is about being a bit kinder, isn't it?
Yeah, and I just wonder why we're not. Why isn't that our more natural experience? Like it can't all be because of our mothers. Like, right? Like, is it just because the world is generally kind of a nasty place, or it's just the nature of humanity? I don't know. I don't know why because we're not born that way. We're not born to think negatively of ourselves.
No, that's very true. There's a big connection here, I think, in I don't know if you've noticed this about mistakes and making
Mhm.
mistakes. And I think that culturally, we kind of shifted to this place that if you make a mistake, like, oh my God, you failed that exam at 17, you're not going to go to college, you won't get a job,
Right.
and you'll probably be homeless, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
I think that we have a very faulty and unhelpful attitude towards mistakes, whereas mistakes are the juice of life. Mistakes are where it's at. That's how we learn and grow. But I think our belief system and mindset about them, I think, is a big trigger to the negative thinking patterns. Would you think?
I totally agree with that. Now that you mentioned it that way, because that's one of my biggest. So I'm the mistake maker in our family, right? My husband is perfect. He is always was the straight A student. He doesn't really make mistakes. He's the perfect driver. So like I crash the cars, I get the speeding tickets, I forget to take the school picture format. Like I'm just that girl. I think that for so many years in my younger years, it was terrible for me, and I think maybe it was the way I was raised or whatever. Wasn't We weren't allowed to make mistakes maybe, or things were criticized.
Yeah.
And so I grew up for sure with a lot of that. I'm not good enough. Like, I suck at life. Like, I'm a terrible parent because I forgot the stupid picture. And that just continued on in my relationship. And because my husband, I mean, he's a lovely man. He's wonderful and smart and great. He just doesn't have the same kind of brain as me. And so it's even hard for him to understand. How could you forget this? Like, this is just what you're going to school. Like, you know what I mean? And so I had to shift away from those thoughts into that, very much that phrase of, even though I forgot that form, I look at all the things I did. I did 100 things today, like 100 things. I got the kids dressed. We were on time. They're clean. I didn't get in an accident. I made lunch. Like I did 1,000 things. And then I made this one little mistake. So when I started to put it into a picture that looked like that, for
Hmm.
me, that was a big shift. I can't remember who showed that to me, but once I realized, like, gosh, this is just one small thing in a sea of hundreds of things I did really well today. And I think if we're living in a lifestyle where 100 out of 150 of the things you're doing are not great, or they're mistakes, then there's some work to be done there,
Hmm.
right? Like
Hmm.
there's something going on there that's not working.
Mm.
And so you do need a little bit of help with that. But if you're living in a lifestyle where most of the things you're doing are going pretty well, and then you have one or two hiccups in each day,
Mm.
pretty darn good.
Yeah, it's really it's so helpful to have someone that you can reflect this stuff with, but also having all of these like reframes that you're talking about, because we can't think our way, we can't use the thinking that has got us into the negative thinking to get us out of the negative thinking, right? All these things and all of this. I'm 23 and a half years sober, and I still need someone every so often to just pull me out of like it's
Mm.
perspective, isn't it? It's perspective.
It's funny too. Like some of it starts just with language. You made me think of something that I think would probably be helpful to your listeners too, because it still helps me when I can catch it. Right. So I had a client. She was a newish client to me in my private practice, and she came in, lovely woman. She's got a couple kids. She's doing the things, and and in about the first 15 minutes of our time together, she said, "It's just so hard." It's like about 50 times. Well, it's so hard. It's so, I mean, and I finally stopped her. I said, "Do you know that you've said it's so hard
Mm-hmm.
about 50 times,
Mm.
literally just since you've been here?" And so I'm starting to think, well, gosh, I don't know why you would think it was anything else except really hard, because you continuously tell yourself that all day long.
Mm.
And so I think she wasn't aware of that, or no one's ever spoken to her that way. And so
Mm,
she was like, "Oh," I said, "I understand that this is part of your pattern, but if we can get you to kind of catch that, even if it's 65% of the time, and start to shift that into like something else. This is a challenge right now, but I know how to solve it." Or, "Yes, this is painful, but I've been in this place before," or whatever it is for you that's going to work. I can do hard things. I can do hard things. I can do hard things. We keep repeating that rather than getting away from that pattern of it's so hard. I mean, I was starting to feel like, "Well, gosh, it is hard. You're right." And I just think that we have to check our language. So those are just little reframes that we can start to. So maybe it's like about health for you, or food, or I'm trying to reshift that even with the food, because I'm coming off of that stuff that happened during COVID for me, and then I had a kind of a good time, but then I slipped a little again, and I was starting to struggle a little, and I'm getting back into, I don't eat things like that,
mm,
or I choose not to nourish my body with those kinds of foods.
mm,
Not like it's bad,
mm,
or it's gross, or you shouldn't eat that. It's
mm,
just I choose. I choose not to do that because it doesn't make me feel good.
mm.
Things like that.
Yeah, that has been fantastic. This is so interesting, and this stuff is so important because this is what's underneath a drinking problem, right? Negative thinking. We can think ourselves right back into that a drink is a solution, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, and then anything can be a solution. Once you stayed sober for a while, we can make anything a drink or a drug.
Yeah,
We can make Netflix or TikTok or food, or whatever it is, sex, anything. So we just have to always be cautious. I feel like I'm always trying to be cautious of any kind of alcoholic behavior that I might be exhibiting.
yeah,
What is going on with me right
yeah.
now? What's happening right now? It's bothering me. It's usually something.
So, how long have you been sober for?
21 years. I got sober in 2002.
Yeah. So what's your like women listening to this? I know you work with women who are sober but really need some help. Women who are struggling, who are sober and really struggling that right now. What would you like them to hear?
I would like them to hear that they're not alone.
Mm,
That no matter, like, I just shared a pretty personal part of my life that happened when I was over 10 years sober. I mean, I was probably 15 years sober when all that stuff was going on. And so we're never immune
mm,
to life's challenges, right? People
mm-hmm,
die, we get sick, we have marital problems, kids happen. And so you're never alone in
mm,
your problems, no matter what your Instagram feed looks like, or your community. Like in my community, I've struggled a little bit with
mm,
regular people. I say regular people. I never had a problem with other women who are doing our lifestyle necessarily.
mm,
But when it comes to like other people, with trying to be friends with them or whatever, I sometimes really struggle with lack of genuineness, like
mm,
that truth that
mm,
people weren't really willing to share.
mm.
And I'm a person that really wants that authentic to go deep with people. So I
Same.
know, you and I are connected. Why would I spend time with you if you're not going to share the real stuff? I want to hear you don't like your husband today. I want to hear your kids being a jerk. Not because I'm trying to be gossipy, but because I want to relate.
Mm,
And so I would tell them, you're never alone, no matter what.
mm,
And whether it's me or you, or there's somebody in the community that's kind of really doing what you've done, or has already been through it,
mm,
and can definitely provide you with support and guidance. There's definitely formal things we can do. Yeah, I know
mm,
you have courses and retreats, and so do I. And there's formal things we can do. We can start to get into the nitty gritty and go through a module course. Like that's awesome. There's nothing wrong with that, and it can be very, very, very helpful when you're in that stuck place.
mm. Shelby, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we did this. Can you tell people where they can find you?
Sure. So I hang out a lot on I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. You can search my name. I have a Facebook group called Confident Sober Women. So I do hang out on Facebook a little bit more because that's where my group is. And you can come and join. It's a free private group. But I have my podcast too. So come and listen and see what you think. And I'd love to know.
Yeah, and we'll put all of those links in the show notes. But yeah,
Awesome.
thank you so much for being here. This has really been great. You've really touched on some really good stuff here, and I know people will get a lot out of
Thank you.
listening. Let us know what you think about the podcast when it goes live on social media, and we will be back next week. Thanks, Shelby.